Iran just did something horrible. As it failed to defend itself against Operation Epic Fury, Iran turned its sights toward Qatar and Kuwait. But Iran didn't hit military targets. It struck gas, including one of the world's largest liquefied natural gas, or LNG, facilities. The U.S. couldn't let this stand. Its retaliation was instant, merciless, and served as a brutal reminder that the U.S. can do even more damage to Iran whenever it wants. We'll start with Qatar. On March 18th, Iran managed to fire off some ballistic missiles at the country that is currently the second largest LNG exporter in the entire world, along with being a major supplier to Asia. Qatar's defense ministry provided the basic details in an ex-post where it said, "The Qatari Ministry of Defense announces that the state of Qatar was subjected today, Wednesday, to an attack involving 5 ballistic missiles launched from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Our armed forces, by the grace of God, successfully intercepted 4 of the ballistic missiles, while 1 missile fell in Ras Laffan industrial city, causing a fire." This isn't the first time that Iran has targeted Ras Laffan. On March 3rd, Iran fired off a warning shot by striking the plant with one of its Shahid drones. Though the attack didn't cause any significant damage, Qatar chose to halt production at the plant, which is responsible for about a fifth of the world's LNG supply. However, the March 18th strike was different. Qatar Energy, which operates Ras Laffan, has confirmed that Iran's most recent attack has caused extensive damage to the facility. It could take years to bring Ras Laffan back up to full capacity, and the impact is already being felt. According to Le Monde, the morning after the Iranian strike saw the Dutch TTF natural gas futures contract, which is the benchmark for gas pricing in Europe, rise by 28.06% to hit €70, or a little over $81, after already having seen a market opening surge of 35%. This is all part of Iran's plan. It wants to put pressure on the U.S. by driving up the prices of gas and oil. The U.S. isn't taking any of this lying down, and its brutal revenge is a reminder to Iran that it can wreck the regime's economy far faster than Iran can impact the rest of the world. Stick with us, as we'll be covering that revenge in a few minutes. As for Iran, it wasn't over with Ras Laffan. Following up from its attack on a Qatari LNG plant, Iran unleashed a 2-day attack on Kuwait's largest oil refinery, Mina Al-Ahmadi. Al Jazeera reports that Iran's drones caused fires to break out at multiple units across the refinery, which it says processes 730,000 barrels of oil per day, turning them into usable products such as gasoline and diesel. For context, the price of a barrel of oil is hovering around and sometimes above the $100 mark. So what Iran tried to do is take a facility that processes around $73 million of crude oil every day, offline forever. Iran failed. Though it managed to shut down several refining units, Iran didn't shut down the entire refinery. Its regime also failed to inflict any casualties, which is important in terms of Kuwait not losing civilians and in terms of maintaining experts who can keep the struck refinery running. Still, this is an escalation by Iran, as it shows that the country is happy to target civilian enterprises in its war with the United States. Unable to defend its own military infrastructure, Iran is instead living up to its reputation as being the bully of the Middle East. We'll explain why that matters in a moment. Before we do, it's important to note that Iran's attacks weren't completely unprompted. This was a tip-for-tap response after Israel struck an Iranian-owned gas field. However, that attack was also a response to Iran launching a previous strike against a Middle Eastern gas field. On March 17th, an Iranian drone assault caused operations at the Shah gas field, which is about 111 miles southwest of Abu Dhabi, to be suspended. That facility supplies about 20% of the United Arab Emirates' annual gas, along with 5% of the world's granulated sulfur, The Guardian reports. Israel's response to this attack was to launch one of its own at the South Paz gas field, which Iran shares with Qatar. That gas field is the largest source of domestic energy in Iran. Qatar could see what was coming after South Paz. A spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry, Majed Al-Ansari, labeled Israel's attack as a dangerous and irresponsible step, adding that targeting energy infrastructure threats a global energy security. Iran's response to the South Pole strike proves Ansari right. What we have here is a situation that Iran is salivating over. It knows that it can't compete with the sheer power that the U.S. brings to bear in Operation Epic Fury, but if it's given any excuse to attack the oil and gas facilities throughout the Middle East, it's going to take that excuse and run with it. Iran is trying to start a gas war, and its plan could be working. We've already mentioned the skyrocketing price of gas in the wake of Iran's attacks. Per the Financial Times, analysts are already predicting that the attack on Ras Laffan has the potential to cause a lasting global gas shortage, though the scale of the damage caused in the strike will determine how long that shortage lasts. MST financial energy analyst Sol Kavanagh tells the outlet, even when the war ends, the impact on supply could last months or even years as repairs are undertaken. Australia's ABC News highlights another issue with a quote from an unnamed Australian who operates out of the Middle East. Though this person said that they are also unsure of the extent of the damage done at Ras Laffan, they added, "These are hugely complex propane-cooled operations that have been urgently stopped, not shut down through a sequence. That alone is damaging." Even if the operations themselves haven't been the direct targets of Iran's missiles, as we speak, most major Gulf region oil and gas producers have been forced to curtail their output, the Financial Times reports, and these reductions will only get worse if Iran is allowed to continue targeting energy infrastructure in the Middle East. This is the gas and oil war that Iran wants to create. What we may be seeing here is a turning point in Operation Epic Fury, an operation that had mostly been limited to Iran's territory, outside of a handful of isolated strikes against American bases in the Middle East, has taken on a new complexion. Even the U.S. has tried to leave Iran's energy supply alone, as we saw in its attack on Karg Island, where it took out the island's military infrastructure while leaving its oil facilities, which are key to Iran's entire economy, untouched. But when Israel attacked the south, Pars gas field, it also represented a direct threat to Iran's energy stability. Iran's response, albeit one that came after Iran had already sent drones to attack another energy facility, was to ramp up its attacks. Drones have become ballistic missiles. One of the world's most vital LNG facilities is up in flames. There's another facet to all of this that we've yet to cover. Energy production in the Gulf region isn't just about the dollars and cents, or the provision of oil and gas to the countries that need it. Energy is everything in this region. It influences the political, diplomatic, and social relationships that Gulf nations have with one another. And it's often the sharing of energy wealth that allows the regimes that head the Gulf nations to stay in power. Energy is how these nations attract foreign workers. It underpins every relationship that the Gulf nations form, with each other and nations the world over. We see that in the south, Pars gas field, which Qatar has been able to use at times to serve as a diplomatic bridge between itself and Iran, The Guardian reports. If those types of facilities are now being targeted, the entire foundation of Gulf region diplomacy is at stake. Again, exactly how Iran wants it. The more chaos that Iran's regime can sow outside of its own territory, the more pressure it can place on the U.S. to stop Operation Epic Fury. Look at the price of oil. Look at the price of gas Iran can declare. The war is causing all of this, and it creates mass confusion within nations that were never part of the fight. Iran can point the finger at the U.S. as the reason for all of this, even as ballistic missiles and drones made on its territory crash into oil and gas facilities. Iran is looking to create a shutdown. It wants to spark the kind of global chaos that will force the American hand and put an end to Operation Epic Fury. This is an escalation beyond what the U.S. had anticipated, as the tit-for-tat energy war starts to take hold. If the U.S. isn't careful, this is a situation that could spiral well out of control. So America had to take revenge. Swift, brutal, and calculated, this revenge is a reminder to Iran that the cards that its regime thinks it holds aren't the aces that it believes it has in the pocket. But before we dive into the U.S. revenge, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to hit the button. America's response to Iran's attacks was twofold. First up, the A-10s have been sent in to tackle Iran's fast boats in the Strait of Hormuz. That's according to the United States chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, who said in a March 19th press briefing that the A-10 Thunderbolt II attack aircraft that the U.S. has stationed around Iran are now in flight. These aircraft are hunting and killing fast attack boats in the Strait of Hormuz. Kane added in what is the latest step by the U.S. to reopen the Strait of Hormuz that Iran has managed to mostly close off since the launch of Operation Epic Fury. You may be wondering what this response has to do with Iran's attacks on Gulf oil and gas. The answer can be summed up with one word: leverage. The Strait of Hormuz has become one of the most powerful pressure points through which Iran is trying to rattle global energy markets. As the Brookings Institution points out, about 20% of global oil consumption, along with a major share of LNG exports, especially from Qatar, flows through this narrow passage each year. On a normal day, over 100 ships carrying this precious cargo sail through the strait. Now, ships are making it through in drips and drabs, assuming they make it through at all. On the riskiest days, crossings can drop noticeably, creating the impression of near-empty lanes. The reason is that Iran is trying to make the Strait of Hormuz impossible for these merchant ships to cross. One of the ways that it's doing it is to deploy its fast boats into the narrow waterway to serve as an ever-present threat against civilian ships attempting to sail through. Just like with its direct attacks on Gulf oil and gas, this is Iran using a terroristic approach in response to the U.S. destroying its military infrastructure. Iran's Strait of Hormuz approach relies on the fast boats that it deploys into the waters. Boats like the Blade Runner, which naval technology says is built in the UK, but has ended up in Iran through a series of international transactions designed to obfuscate the real buyers, now patrol the Strait of Hormuz. They sail at speeds well over 30 knots, which is more than enough for them to approach slow-moving oil and gas tankers as they attempt to transit the strait. And when these fast boats arrive at their quarry, they unleash drones, missiles, gunfire, and anything that they can to either force the tanker to turn back or burn it up in the water. Retired Royal Navy Vice Admiral Duncan Potts tells The Times, "This has always been Iran's naval strategy. Iran learned this lesson in the 1980s during the first tanker war, that if you have a conventional navy, it's vulnerable if you come up against the U.S. Navy, so they went asymmetric and relied on cheap, small, inshore craft that could cause a lot of damage. They didn't require naval facilities. You could just pop out, carry out an attack, and go back into hiding." And that's the problem. Most of the time, these boats are too fast for American warships to react to, and they can avoid the naval power that the U.S. deploys into the Strait of Hormuz. But the A-10, that's a different proposition altogether. The U.S. has about 160 A-10s left in its Air Force. Originally, these attack aircraft were designed in the 1970s to be Soviet tank killers, but they've proven themselves to be among the most versatile that the U.S. has available in the years since. Its missiles and bombs can be used to target fast boats. The aircraft is faster in the sky than the fast boats are in the water. And with the 30mm GAU-8 Avenger 7-barrel autocannon built into each A-10, this is an aircraft that can swoop in and shred fast boats before the crews even know what hit it. What we see here is the U.S. sending a message to Iran via the Strait of Hormuz. It's sending in the A-10s to stop Iran from controlling the strait, which in turn strips away the leverage that Iran can use to hold over the Gulf and the rest of the world. And it gets worse for Iran, because it's not just A-10s that are ruining the country's Strait of Hormuz strategy. A new wave of 5,000-pound bunker-busting bombs has been unleashed by the U.S., and they're targeting the missile and fast boat launch sites that dot the coastline of Strait of Hormuz. These bombs are GBU-72s, which are reportedly being dropped by F-15Es on the hardened Iranian anti-ship missile facilities that are all over the coast. These powerful bombs first surfaced in 2021 when news broke of the U.S. conducting tests on the bomb at Eglin Air Force Base. They can be fitted into F-15Es, as we're now seeing in Iran, as well as B-1B Lancer bombers, which we know have been deployed in Iran and are currently using RAF Fairford in the UK as a base of operations. Guided using a combination of GPS and inertial navigation, these bunker busters are attached to KMU 572 JDAM kits, allowing the U.S. to launch them from standoff range and still hit their targets. The massive kinetic energy generated by these bombs as they plummet toward a target, combined with their design, is what gets them through concrete and soil, and once the GBU-72 penetrates, it explodes, wrecking everything in its path. Obviously, these strikes are designed to relieve pressure on the Strait of Hormuz, again depriving Iran of the leverage that we spoke about earlier. However, the U.S. is also specifically targeting missile launch sites with its new bunker busters. These sites may be the ones that Iran is using to launch attacks against the likes of Qatar and Kuwait. This is revenge on a far more brutal scale. Taking out the fast boats with A-10s is one thing, but launching GBU-72s at Iran's coastal missile launch sites delivers a message right back to Iran in the wake of its gas and oil infrastructure strikes. You may have hit them once, the U.S. is saying, but we're going to make sure you don't ever hit them again. And to make matters worse for Iran, there may be so much more coming. We'll get to that in just a moment, so hang with us until the end of the video. But first, the U.S. has made it very clear that its revenge for Qatar and Kuwait isn't going to end until Iran's regime finally gives up. Admiral Brad Cooper, who leads U.S. Central Command, has made that clear in the wake of the bunker-busting deployment, stating, "We also remain zeroed in on dismantling Iran's decades-old threat to the free flow of commerce throughout the Strait of Hormuz." U.S. President Donald Trump has been even blunter with his threats against Iran. On March 22nd, Al Jazeera reported that Trump warned that the U.S. would start targeting Iran's domestic power stations if freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz isn't restored within the next 48 hours. The U.S. has already hit Iran hard in retaliation for actions in Qatar and Kuwait. If Trump is to be believed, the U.S. is planning to hit even harder against key energy infrastructure inside Iran if the regime doesn't open up the Strait of Hormuz by March 24th. And as all of these threats are being thrown around, A-10s are patrolling the strait, bunker busters are dropping on Iran's missile launch sites, and as ABC News points out, Iran's mine-laying vessels are also being destroyed. Kane says that 44 of those types of vessels have been taken out of the equation as of March 19, which is another shot against Iran's aim to use the Strait of Hormuz as the leverage it needs to enable its attacks further into the Gulf region. The U.S. is also ramping up its attacks on the command and control structures within Iran that are controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The more of those structures that go down, the harder it will be for Iran to be able to coordinate strikes like those it carried out against Ras Laffan in the future. Finally, there's Kharg Island. You may remember that we told you earlier that the U.S. has held off on destroying Kharg Island's oil infrastructure. After Iran strikes against Qatar and Kuwait, that may change, and it would cripple Iran if it does. Beyond serving as something of a military outpost, Kharg Island is basically a giant oil terminal that The Independent says holds over 90% of Iran's oil exports. At just 7.7 square miles, the island is also extremely vulnerable to American airstrikes, which could raze its oil infrastructure to the ground. The U.S. is wary of hitting Kharg Island again because it wants to keep that oil infrastructure in place, but sending troops to take the island, that's a different prospect altogether, and it would allow the U.S. to gain control over the one thing that is propping up Iran's economy. The Independent says that plans for this seizure are already being discussed by the administration officials. If it happens, Iran's entire economy could collapse. If Iran wants to cause oil and gas price shocks, the U.S. could respond by making it impossible for Iran to sell its oil. Then it would play the waiting game. Iran may try to attack Gulf states again, but it would be doing so knowing that it's fighting on borrowed time, as what little cash that enters the country gets choked off. Maybe you don't believe that the U.S. would put boots on the ground in Kharg Island, and who knows, perhaps you're right. But if you are, then you have to wonder why the U.S. is sending over 2,000 of its Marines to Iran as we speak. If you want to find out more about this unit and what it may do once it reaches Iran, check out our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show so you don't miss any of our Operation Epic Fury coverage. And thank you, as always, for watching.